I have no idea what I'm on. Survey says, oh, no, I'm just on boring old regular thing. And hi, all. So I am so sorry. We were having some serious technical difficulties. Hope somebody don't give up. Come back. Now I gotta find my chat again. So we'll go a whole minute over. I'm usually to the last second. I'll keep talking, and we had some technical difficulties. Hopefully everyone finds us. But if you don't know, I'm Bob Linde of Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies and the School of Herbal Studies in St. Petersburg, Florida. And my assistant today is Maddie, who is a graduate of the Chinese program and is going to be trying her very best to keep up with all your awesome questions. And when I say crazy things, she's usually pretty good about typing in the foolishness. And I have no idea where the chat is again, but that's okay. I don't care because Maddie's got me. So, what do I want to? We got a couple of things we're going to try to cover today. We're going to talk about addiction. We're going to talk about bioregional plants, both spiritual and medicinal, that we can use for replacements, and things that can help with memory, as well as pre and post surgical stuff that we can do, and conference stuff. But of course, I got to give a selfless plug for myself in the school. Sadly, I'm not taking new patients at the moment. Got a little too busy. So we've got some awesome herbalists and acupuncturists here if you do need to come in. And we've always got our student clinic. So for both our Chinese and Western programs here, we have weekly, 3 nights a week, we have intern clinic. Monday night is both Chinese medicine herb consults, as well as we have 4 acupuncture interns right now that are in their last year of school and are totally awesome. And Tuesday night is Western Herbal Clinic, and Wednesday night is the Chinese herb students' opportunity to get some practice. All of them are supervised by me or one of the other senior herbalists here. And of course, at the School of Herbal Studies, we have a crap ton of classes coming up. And I'm just going to go, oh my God, there's so many classes. I'm just going to selflessly put this up. There is the last Western Herbal 101 of the season before our foundations classes start. And then a new one we just added in is physical assessment for the herbalist. So our own Trisha is going to be doing that one. And oh my God, there's so many classes. We have an Ayurvedic class series, herbs, there we go. Western herb theories, I'm going to talk about that, a Western herb series, there we go. And then anatomy and physiology for the herbalist, all coming up. And these, the last ones, there are classes there's no prerequisites for anatomy and physiology for the herbalist, the Western herb series or the Ayurvedic. You can jump in as you desire, and we do all of our classes now are both online and in person. So it's, with yay COVID, they forced us into it. So that, for better or worse. And so for anybody who signed up for a class, we do send you the recording of that. So if I talk at 400 miles an hour, you can still understand all of it. It's funny, I was going to talk a little bit. Ruthie is teaching our, she does the medicine making classes, and also she came up with this brilliant idea. So often when we teach classes, we don't get to spend enough time talking about an individual herb. And there's so much to know. Every herb we could go on. We could teach a whole weekend on one herb if we wanted to. And it's funny. I actually taught for 8 hours, I think, straight on kratom for the American Herbalist Guild. It might have been longer than that. They had me do a 4-part webinar series just on kratom alone. Because with everything, how to grow it, how to harvest it, the pros and cons, the chemistry, its actions and energetics, common combinations, oh my God, the list is endless. So Ruth decided that we needed to spend more time with herbs, so she's doing like 2 hours, 2.5 hours on a single herb, and just super fun. She just has done the first 2 herbs. She did cinnamon and I think ginger, the first 2. She's got violet coming up, and hopefully I can make it to some of these. She's got violet coming up, then dandelion, rosemary, plantain, rose, mint, passion hawthorn, goldenrod, and sage. That's stuff the turkey sage, not the desert sage. So I totally recommend those. She's doing all kinds of cool stuff with that. We've just restarted the Anatomy and Physiology series, and I think, oh yeah, and the Ayurvedic series, we're doing body systems with that, and so that's a link so that we'll do 1 week the Anatomy and Physiology on, say, the muscular system, and the next week we'll do the Ayurvedic series. We'll match that. So we're trying to sync things up so people can really just flow along. Let's talk about, I don't know, something really simple like addiction. It's funny. I was recently I was contemplating doing a standalone class on that, because addiction in general is such a complex subject, and whether you're an acupuncturist or an herbalist or just a human, it's something that we all deal with, whether it's personally or as having a dependence upon a particular substance. And I say that like I got a thing for carbohydrates, and it does give me cravings. Luckily, it won't kill me quickly, nor it's still very socially acceptable. Or we can look at things more challenging, like opiates or cigarettes and alcohol and so forth. And so most of us have been touched somewhere in our life by somebody who's struggling, or ourselves. And there's always, when we're dealing with that, it's a multi-pronged approach. And we have to recognize that there's different stages of addiction as well. And the approaches for it, usually I encourage people, when they have the opportunity, to almost look at the pre-withdrawal. The idea of, unless it's life-threatening, immediacy in it, but to say, all right, on such and such a date, I am now going to be free of insert substance here. And I always encourage people to use positive statements with that, rather than I'm a non-smoker, I'm a non-drinker, or like, because there's some conjecture that the brain literally doesn't recognize the negative, that it really just needs positive statements. So to be free of tobacco, free of refined carbohydrates, free of alcohol or opiates. And that gives you an opportunity to set up, buying that last pack of cigarettes, starting to remove things from your house, to clean things, to explore the reasons as to why you do things. And it's funny, with food addictions, I think probably one of the most common ones, as a nation, I think we're addicted to foods, and we put huge value judgments with food. The newest thing you see advertised on TV and stuff, Noom, literally isn't about some special diet you have to do. It looks at the reasoning, the psychological aspects as to why somebody struggles with particular foods or weight and so forth. And that's kind of smart, because that's usually the pitfall. It's like, if we understand why we make these poor choices, sometimes just shining the light on it allows us to avoid making those mistakes going forward. And the same is true of every substance. One of the, finish that thought. Sorry, I'm feeling very ADD today. Once we then look at the actual cessation of a substance, we're looking at the acute phase, where we're dealing with physical withdrawal symptoms. The body is physically addictive. Forget the emotional aspect for a moment. We're physically addicted to a substance, and as our body craves it, and whether that's nicotine, alcohol, opiates, and so forth, we get anything from very mild symptoms to life-threatening, depending on the substance. And luckily, very few of them are life-threatening. Certain prescription medications, your barbiturates, can be life-threatening. Alcohol can. The other ones are like food and nicotine. And oddly, the opiates certainly can be to the extreme, but usually are not life threatening for somebody who's in average health. Um, so the alcohol is a challenging one because that can be life threatening and oftentimes requires a hospital intervention for that initial. And I usually look at it around a 10-day for the physical aspect on it. And that's an average. Some substances are maybe a little bit longer than that. Most are actually less than 10 days. But just to play it safe, I usually in my head look at that 10-day window as the physical. After that, it's usually thought to be a more emotional behavioral issue rather than a physiological medical reason why we're challenged by that. That said, with every substance, and I hate to say it off the top of my head because this is literally me just zero prep on this one, on all of these, what I do with open forum. Usually with each substance, there are realized that there are times when people relapse. We see that with alcohol, opiates, tobacco, that anybody can stop alcohol or cigarettes, for instance, for a month. But we usually see at 6 months and a year, people classically fall off. And so if you're trying to deal with a particular addiction, do some research into when those common times are. And it's not well understood why that is, because we do see that, like, I want to say opiates, that it's at between 13 and 15 months, I think. And so that's at a time when we need to get cognizant of it and watch out for that potential slip up, and get family and friends and so forth to help us with it. So I'm going to come big circle around here because we use very different herbs and acupuncture and lifestyle adjustments based on whether we're in that acute phase or in that chronic phase. But I think going into it, there's a couple things to look at. One is the current concept as to why people get addicted to substances. And there's some nature nurture. Do you have an addictive personality? Was it learned because all of your family members were addicted to a particular substance? And without a doubt, those are all contributing factors. But as a general rule, for substances that are not socially acceptable, drinking too much, abuse of certain pills, opiates, and so forth, it's thought that the concept of dual diagnosis, and that's the idea that the person self-medicating to address a underlying mental or emotional disorder. If you have an anxiety disorder, you might be using a social lubricant like alcohol. And so anxiety disorders are very common. Depression is common. And the whole list of the DMS, I don't know, what are we up to, 5 or 6 at this point? I don't even know. So in order to have success, we need to be able to recognize what that underlying mental emotional disorder is and address it so there isn't a need for that self-medication. And that can be either through herbs, diet, lifestyle, and of course prescription medications that are properly prescribed. And sometimes those medications are correct, not to demean those, because we can then take the longer route to try to correct that imbalance through an energetic standpoint and so forth. But if we need to, for safety's sake, get somebody off sooner, it may be necessary to use prescription medications. So the other part, especially from long-term use of, and I'm using the classics of tobacco, alcohol, opiates, each of those substances also depletes the body of nutrients as time goes on. Alcohol really depletes the B vitamins, vitamin C, and actually almost all of those actually do, but for all of them. And part of that is the body's trying, we're taking in a substance that is an irritant, a toxic substance. The body has to somehow try to remove those out of the body, and that's frequently the B vitamins role, and antioxidants, vitamin C being the easiest one to source. And so even, that's part of that lead up. I oftentimes look at supplementing with B vitamins, vitamin C, in that pre-section before we even try to stop, just to try to create some strength in the body in order to go through it. The other thing is magnesium. As long as you're able to use magnesium, and there's more than 3 types, but we generally look at 3 types of magnesium. Magnesium oxide, magnesium citrate, and magnesium glycinate. I don't use magnesium oxide when trying to deal with addiction. Except for opiates, it's a consideration. The citrate is better if there's constipation, i.e. opiates cause constipation. And the glycinate doesn't affect the bowels. But the citrate and the glycinate is wonderful for muscle spasms and contractions, anxiety, and sleep. And those are all potential side effects of most drug withdrawals, or most substance withdrawals, I should say. And notice I'm not saying food going forward, because food's a whole other ballgame that we'll try to talk about as well. So starting with that magnesium as a potential for part of that underlying dual diagnosis idea. One of my favorites to use, because we also have to be safe with all of this, is we need to make sure they're hydrated. And so we can, in that act of ensuring people are hydrating, because sweating is a common cause of common side effect in that initial stage, we can make really strong teas, infusions, in order to bolster them through this process. And it always comes down to, depends on the substance, and it depends on the severity of the withdrawal symptoms. But passion flower is very common to use. Passion flower, we usually think of that as important for that circular thinking. So we use it for anxiety, but really I like to think about that as we're just revolving around the same idea, which is the nature of going through withdrawal, because that's all you can think about is finding that fix of whatever it is. I love oat tops or milky oats. It's moistening and dryness. When we look at smoking, when we look at alcohol, when we look at a lot of pills, then dryness is frequently a part of that. So this is mineralizing, it's moistening and nourishing, and helps with anxiety, depression, what I like to call frazzled nerves. It's funny, if I had to choose a single herb, it would be milky oats. I had somebody, against my recommendation, took themselves off of Klonopin, a barbiturate, and cold turkey, after being on it for over 20 years. And she couldn't be consistent with anything else. And all she did is she took probably a quarter pound of oat tops. She didn't have milky oats, and put them in her blender every morning and drank it throughout the day. And that actually got her through successfully. So it's like, we think it's just a fancy oatmeal. It's better than that. And it really, it's funny. She reminded me it's been over 2 years now that she's been off of Klonopin, specifically. So oat tops, passion flower, magnesium, citrate or glycinate, and there's a number of other, we usually look to adaptogens and nervines to help with this. And so adaptogens that are frequently used are things like ashwagandha from Ayurvedic medicine. So long as they don't have a sensitivity to nightshades, I use that one quite a bit. You can actually use ginseng, can be very effective to give people strength, make them feel grounded. Both of those are roots, the ashwagandha and the ginseng. And there's certainly a slew of other things. Sometimes licorice can be helpful. Then we can look at some of our nervines and sedatives, things like the passion flower oats. We can use vervain, holy basil. are all very helpful. I'm going to come back to that. And there's, if we're looking at specific symptoms that are expected with withdrawal, we might look at things like some bulking agents with some substances. We get alternating constipation and diarrhea, so we might look at some high fiber things. Anything from psyllium husk for constipation, some moistening herbs like hemp seeds, something called Rong Kong Rong, which is a moistening, warming substance in Chinese medicine. And for nausea and vomiting, we can use anything from mints, ginger, catnip is one of my favorites, as long as you don't have a cat. Otherwise, he'll fight you for it. And then a lot of times we look at specific substances that we use for specific substances. And for instance, in the case of tobacco, we usually use lobelia because lobelia helps to fill the nicotine receptor sites. And so we'll incorporate that into infusion, into a tea blend. Sometimes in that pre-phase with nicotine, we'll actually do herbal smokes, and so we'll use mullein as a base, and a little bit of tobacco, a little bit of lobelia. If I can add in something like mint if they're used to menthols, and a little skull cap if there's an underlying anxiety. All of those can be rolled up or smoked into a pipe. It's still bad for you. It's hot burning smoke, so that's never good for your lungs, even if it's herbal. And then we slowly titrate down up until the stop date the nicotine, the tobacco that's in there. And then the trick is we need to get them out of that oral fixation, that aspect of having a smoke. I find things like toothpicks, carrot sticks, celery sticks act as that nervous habit to put it into your mouth that works really well. With alcohol, we can use kudzu flowers, gegenhua or gehua in Chinese medicine. That is specific for that initial stage of dosing off of alcohol. It's been shown to process the alcohol out of the body faster, and so it gets that last drink that they have out of their system. It seems to help them get through the withdrawal process faster. And then if we look at some of the energetic use of the kudzu flower, it's shown to have, and it's a beautiful flower, beautiful smell, even if it is the plant that ate the South. It's shown to have a calming effect and also very heart opening. So when there's some emotional trauma that people are trying to sedate with alcohol, I think it has some longer term benefits to it beyond that. And it's not wrong to use both the flower and the root. The root is considered a food starch, but very high in minerals, particularly in iron, and not uncommon in long-term alcohol abuse to see some anemia and iron deficiencies. And then with opiates, a very controversial herb is kratom. And some folks who struggle with opiates will also struggle with kratom. But the reality is they can go through withdrawal off of their opiate drugs, from legal ones to not legal ones to heroin, you name it. They can use kratom, Mitragynine speciosa, a tree. It's the leaf of a tree in the coffee family that comes from Southeast Asia. And that fills at least two of the three opiate receptor sites and acts as an agonist as well as an antagonist. And so literally thousands of people have successfully gotten off of their opiate drugs by using kratom. The problem is they may still have to go through active, difficult withdrawal from the kratom. We have characters going by the front of the clinic. And so most people, like I've been to the kava bar already today. And so Most people don't have a problem with kratom. Majority of the people, I'd say 90% of the people, can drink kratom, enjoy it as a social beverage to help them with their chronic pain, help it with anxiety. In my case, I like the stimulant effect of it, and so it helps me focus, and so I use it for my ADD. And I have no problem sometimes doing it daily for a month. I can stop it and have no ill effects. I usually just switch to coffee. Um, and even though kratom's not thought to have that, I have less withdrawal symptoms from kratom. I have more withdrawal symptoms from coffee, honestly, because I really enjoy my coffee too, probably to my detriment. Um, and I'm going to say those are the biggies. Prescription meds, antidepressants are really hard to get off of, and barbiturates are really hard to get off of. And there's not a, hey, just take this and it'll make your life easier. I hate to say it, it's just hard work. With those, it's usually best to taper, and I would say always working with an MD to help you with that tapering process. Unfortunately, it is still very acceptable to prescribe barbiturates and a number of things like sleep aids, anti-anxiety, and antidepressants that are thought to not be addictive are turning out to be really addictive. So those are very doable to get off of, but they're a little bit more work, and there's not an easy answer for those. So it's usually a combination of all these things. And I would say ultimately, no matter what the addiction is that you're working on, looking at what's the energetic pattern, hot, cold, wet, dry, deficient, excess, tense, and lax, and ensuring that we're putting together a formula to help with that process. One of the things, and I said, like, we can take any of these herbs I talked about and we can make an infusion, a tea out of those. And I said most folks with those substances we mentioned tend towards dry. I usually add hibiscus into that mix, very nourishing, moistening. It's in the mallow family, very much for the heart, and it makes everything taste good. It's super yummy. Other things, I didn't mention marshmallow for smoking. That's always a winner. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. The other things that you can look at, whether you're working with an herbalist or an acupuncturist, but auricular therapy, ear seeds in particular, I think are really helpful. The NADA protocol, the NADA, that's not the nothing, it's the National Addiction Detoxification Association. You can look that up. It was a 5-point protocol started in the 70s specifically to deal with a heroin epidemic that was happening in the New York area in Harlem, with really good research also done with herbs in combination. And they saw like a 40% increase in success of not falling back. So we use that. It's thought to be a balancing protocol. So very, very helpful to do that at any stage in that process, and it can be done by non-licensed people by just doing ear seeds. Also acupressure, what's called Buddha's triangle, and you can use magnets, essential oils, ear seeds, massage. Any of those are appropriate, and that is Heart 7, which is on the ulnar side right below the wrist crease on the inside of the ulnar tendon. Pericardium 6, which is 3 fingers from the wrist crease between the tendons here in the center of the arm, and then lung 9, which is right here on the radial side, just inside the radial tendon, right where you feel the radial pulse. Then I'm going to say some crazy Bob things. This is a Bob opinion. This one is, as far as I know, it's not written down, but I've said it often enough that maybe it is written down now. And as an ex-smoker, I can tell you, like, every smoker, every drinker, everything, everybody has the best intentions to stop. They stop for a day, a week, a month, a year, and something happens that they fall off the wagon and they go right back and pick it right back up where they were. It was probably well over 30 years ago I stopped smoking, and I probably could start smoking a pack a day right now if I wanted to. I always tell the story. It's like if I drive by the place I used to buy my cigarettes, it's not a strong urge, but there's this, my brain remembers there's a slight twitch to go in where I used to buy my cigarettes. And sometimes sitting around a campfire at night quietly, I'm like, oh, I really could have a cigarette right now. And it's like, smack myself in the face and go on. So when we look at the Chinese energetic ideas of some of the organs, we put emotional and behavioral concepts in with those. And one that we look at is with the kidneys, we look at willpower. With the gallbladder, we look at decision making and courage, honestly. And with the spleen, we look, or the digestion, I should say, we look at intelligence. And most people are smart enough to recognize that smoking's bad for you. Shooting up heroin is not your friend, And so sometimes people do need the digestion or the earth element stimulated, but that's the least likely. Most people recognize that what they're doing is harmful. But I find then we find they're less likely to have success. And so I'll use either acupuncture or acupressure or magnets, and you could do essential oils, diluted essential oils, in order to help stimulate those to bring about that decision making. And it's usually pretty basic. I'll use kidney 3 for the willpower, and I'll use either gallbladder 41 near the pinky toe and or GB34 to help with that courage and decision making. So we need the will to carry, if you're like, I'm gonna stop smoking tomorrow, and then tomorrow comes and I don't have the will to carry it out, then it's not successful. If there is a need to do intelligence, I look at either spleen 9 or stomach 36. And so it's never wrong to do those, but if necessary, again, for the initial stages, sometimes we'll also utilize the 4 gates, which is liver 3 and LI4, large intestine 4 and liver 3, sorry. Sitting there using jargon. Not everybody knows what the heck I'm talking about. And you can find the location of any of those by Googling it. It's super easy. I will say that the 4 gates, the large intestine 4 and liver 3, is contraindicated during pregnancy. That would be the only contraindication for those. And the other one that's sometimes helpful, especially when there's a lot of nausea, queasiness, bloating kind of thing that happens with many of these, is spleen 6, which is of course also contraindicated during pregnancy. So other than those two for contraindications, those are safe for anybody. And that can just be gentle massage on any of those points if you don't have any of the fancier tools. The other thing to consider is that we need to look at a support system for folks. And so that may be counseling to help them with the underlying mental emotional disorder. That can be things like AA or NA. And there are organizations that are outside of, we talk about AA as if it's the only thing, but there are other organizations, and I'm sorry, I have a PowerPoint with that, and I don't remember the names of the other organizations. In Europe, they have other ones that are used more commonly. And I think one of the issues most people have with AA is one of the first steps in that 12-step process is recognizing that you're helpless over your addiction and to give yourself over to God. And not everybody's okay with the religious aspects that are oftentimes put into that system. And so what I always tell folks is there's an NA or an AA meaning for every gender, there's every socioeconomic group, and some are really religious and some are not really religious. And so if you've ever been to a meeting, you're like, yeah, I can't do this crap, then go to a different one and find one that's better. They also have them online now. There's usually a hotline you can dial into. In major hotels, in cruise ships, there is always, you can look for Bill W. And so if you ever hear somebody saying a page calling for Bill W, or the Bill W meetings are at a particular time on a cruise ship, that'll actually be written on the schedule, then you can safely know that that's an appropriate AA or NA meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. And even though those are designed specifically for those, narcotic substances or alcohol, somebody who's struggling with another substance, and that could be something like Overeaters Anonymous, or even something as common as cigarettes or tobacco, the concepts that are utilized in those systems are appropriate for any addiction. Not to say every addiction is the same, but there's some commonalities to each one, and the struggles that people deal with all of that. As we go forward, as we get past that physical challenge, then looking at the individual's imbalance, people have, damaged themselves in various ways depending on the substance and the severity of that substance, the frequency of its use. If we're trying to repair the lungs, we can use anything from some of our local plants, like Sida and Biden's alba. We can use things like marshmallow, any of the mallows. If we're looking for liver health, we can be looking at the thistles, and that can be anything from the classic milk thistle seeds to milk thistle leaf. I would argue any thistle will do in a pinch, to include artichoke hearts. And so artichoke hearts, everybody forgets, is the flower of a thistle, and has all of those cholagogue, or good for your liver and gallbladder functions that we recommend for things like, we always associate with milk thistle, like it's the only one. We can look at some of the mushrooms. Reishi mushroom and cordyceps are both really helpful for the lungs. Cordyceps being more moistening, reishi mushroom being more drying. And we can look at adaptogens that are also helpful for the liver, things like schizandra berry, that's wu wei zi in Chinese, that will help to regulate liver enzymes. And obviously liver health is a concern for anybody, whether it's alcohol or pharmaceutical substances. Those all damage the liver. With alcohol in particular, there's always a concern for digestive health, and pancreas. We need to be very protective of that. We need to be mindful of potential blood sugar issues as well. So just good healthy eating, and blood work and screening, specifically looking at that pancreatic health. I think digestive enzymes for the recovering alcoholic is really helpful to take some of that burden off the pancreas. I also find that with a lot of things, with both the opiates, some of the barbiturates, and alcohol in particular, we oftentimes see low stomach acid, and so we see an increased risk of phlegm, wetness, poor digestion, malabsorption. So really looking at how has this affected the body, recognizing that just like everybody, there's imbalances. Frequently with a lot of these, we see a lot of heat. Inflammation is not always the same, but close enough. And then with opiates, there's always poop issues, because the opiate drugs cause basically a paralysis of the bowels, so there's no peristalsis, there's none of the squishing, they chime through the intestines and ultimately into the large intestine for elimination. So I'm a huge fan of high dose magnesium for that, but bulking agents, moistening agents, ensuring that there's enough water, and for some folks that may include going and getting something like a Myers cocktail, an IV nutrition with an extra bag of fluids, just to ensure that they're staying the appropriate level of hydration. With opiates, I also always caution with because sometimes it can be like, don't poop for a week, you end up doing a bunch of things like Dulcolax, all these really strong cathartic things. And so now they have really bad diarrhea, so they go and get Imodium. Imodium's the over-the-counter antidiarrheal. And the downside, if you get out a magnifying glass and try to read the fine print on the insert on there, it will specifically say, if you're a recovering opiate addict, don't use this product, because it uses the opiate receptor sites and has opiate-like reactions, and will, A, it'll stop your diarrhea, but B, it may cause you to relapse. It's not uncommon for folks who are challenged from finding opiate drugs, legal and illegal, to go to a CVS or something and buy up all the Imodium and just take a handful of it just to keep them from going into withdrawal from the opiates, which, ow, that's going to sting. I think I hit a lot of that. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that's a big subject that I need to like do a weekend intensive on that, because holy crap. Yeah, if we got time, we'll come back and do food. Any interesting questions that popped up during all of that? Because I'll do memory next, because we didn't get our first person online we didn't answer her questions yet.
Yeah, we had another question come in about remedies for candida.
All right, let me come back around to that one too. Okay. So let's talk memory. Memory is always a challenge, as there can be any number of different reasons why our memory is challenged. It can be anything from scary, like age-related memory issues, where we're talking Alzheimer's and dementia and so forth. Those are harder to address because those are an actual degeneration of the brain. There are a number of contributing factors, everything from genetics to certain medications, and I'll talk about those in a second. But for most of us, when we're like, I just want better memory, I'm having a hard time focusing, there's a number of contributing factors to that. And some of them are really boring and basic, like I didn't get a good night's sleep. Well, then I have a hard time focusing in memory. If I'm working on 4 hours of sleep, I'm not at my sharpest. And you shouldn't. You need to go get some good sleep. So starting with ensuring that you have a good night's sleep. And then from there, there's a number of factors that can cause, and I'm oversimplifying here, but inflammation of the brain and the tissues around the brain, such as blood sugar issues. And so if we have an elevated blood sugar, it not only does it reduce the microcirculation to the brain, but seems to cause inflammation. If anybody gets really bored, Google type 3 diabetes later. And you'll see that memory issues and actually things like Alzheimer's are being thought of to be a type of blood sugar issue. A lack of nutrients, some really basic ones like zinc and B vitamins and so forth for proper functioning and detoxification. Dehydration is probably one of the most important. Literally, I'm notorious for not drinking water all day long. And I'll be like, why do I wake up and get really focused at night sometimes? It's like, about 4 o'clock I start drinking water again. It literally, I've like forced fluids on myself in order to get hydrated, because I was like, no, I gotta be really sharp to be able to do the open forum. But then there are specific herbs that and let me back that up. The other one is, we can appear to have poor memory sometimes because of things like ADD, attention deficit disorder, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, so ADD or ADHD. And also, and a harder one is things like learning disabilities, dyslexia, and so forth. I would say there's a number of different learning styles that they're actually brilliant, but until they master their own learning style or get some sort of disorder like dyslexia identified, that may be a monkey wrench that's being thrown into their ability to focus and learn and so forth. But we'll leave those to another day, because herbs have a role in everything, but those are a harder one. So there's a lot of research out there to show that caffeine, and coffee in particular, but other caffeinated things, can help with memory and focus and so forth. Although that is true, and they see increased test scores and so forth. Um, there's probably a short-term benefit to that, and also there's a question as to what the long-term benefits are of high-dose coffee. So I don't know that I want to give an 8-year-old shots of espresso before they go to kindergarten or something. That might have some odd outcomes over time. But that said, if we need some short-term stimulation, that's an option, but it's not one I recommend. I generally look at the pair of herbs. Gotu kola and bacopa are my biggest go-tos. Gotu kola, Centella asiatica, or Centella erectus, which is native here for Florida, but we can find both growing here. That one's an interesting herb in that it's slightly drying. You don't have to worry about dosing because it is considered food. So the dosage is yes. Like, it's not uncommon to say, well, just take a handful and throw it in a pot of soup. Put it in a smoothie, and you'll be fine. It's the same crowd going by. It's the third time going by. And that Gotu kola, besides seeming to, everybody says it's good for memory. I would argue that it reduces inflammation in the brain. It's also specific for connective tissue inflammation. And so we've even given that to kids with autism who are barely communicative and really challenged. And we find that within days, there's a dramatic increase in their ability to communicate, that they're less agitated, and so forth. I like pairing it with an Ayurvedic herb called bala. Not bala. Oh my God, no, so bad. Brahmi, there we go. And a lot of Ayurvedic herbs called Brahmi, but this is the right one. No, it's Bacopa montanari, and very common herb. It also grows here in Florida, which is nice. It's also probably in your fish tank if you have fish. And Bacopa has a similar function. It's cooling and moistening, and it seems to have a calming effect. And so I really like the Bacopa for the ADHD, where they just a little hyperactivity. They need be settled down a little bit to focus. That one's the combination of those two. And if you know energetics, you change the ratio between those two. If they tend towards wet, I increase the Gotu kola. If they tend to very dry, tense condition, I increase the Bacopa. But I like using the two together as a pair or a duo. You can also use passion flower. Passion flower is great. Literally, the person who's literally always their head is spinning, they're looking everywhere, every squirrel, they're completely distracted. The passion flower in small doses can be very effective with that. B vitamins can be extremely effective for that. And so a lot of times when we see people who have poor memory, startle easily, restless sleep, they oftentimes are unnourished, so they're deficient. And so we look at a lot of nourishing substances for them. And of course, the famous one, lion's mane. I would say any of the shaggy mushrooms can be used. It's not specific to the lion's mane. And I always find it's funny, and I'm guilty of this too. I'll pop a capsule of lion's mane for whatever reason. But it's more effective to find a local farmer who's growing lion's mane. Even here in Florida, it grows wild here in Florida, but all over the place you can find lion's mane. It's a wonderful, yummy mushroom that you can make soup out of. You can make nice slices and make like a burger out of it. It's so the doses we do in a capsule is kind of laughable. So I always like, actually, make that lunch and trying to get that in there. And then the most famous one, because Shakespeare wrote about it, is rosemary. Rosemary was written about in one of the Shakespeare's stories. I forget which one, I apologize. I haven't read Shakespeare in a while. But the idea that rosemary is for remembering. It helps us remember our past, our present, and ideally to see the future. And I will say, just like growing a rosemary plant and rubbing your hands through it and inhaling it, making a rosemary tea can be really helpful. And honestly, making a strong infusion, a tea of rosemary, and like spraying it into your hair after you're done in the shower and leaving it in can help with your memory and focus throughout the day. And it's a natural hair colorant for dark hair. It's a rubefacient, which is fancy talk for it brings blood to the surface. And it's my number one go-to. I may have said this last time or maybe a time before. I had some questions about cancer. And it's a frightening thing, but like I'd say probably a third to a quarter of my clients right now are dealing with some stage of cancer, either pre or they've been recently diagnosed and going through chemo, radiation, or surgery, or they're now finished with that, or some of them even 5 or 10 years post, and just looking to maintain their health. So I see way too much of that, usually in the more acute phases. And when people first get diagnosed with cancer, you think, oh my God, you said the big C word, I'm going to die, and that would be their concern. And the number one concern I get from people preparing to go through chemo is like, I don't want to lose my hair. And so rosemary is my go-to for retaining the hair. If as you're going through chemo, you make that strong infusion of rosemary, spray it in your hair once or twice a day, ideally twice, 80% of my people don't lose their hair at all. You miss one day, the hair all falls out. And so it is a phenomenal substance. So gotu kola, bacopa, rosemary, B complex is phenomenal for that. And always treating that underlying issue. A lot of memory issues are aggravated by stress, in which case then we need to look toward adaptogens. We need to look at a tense condition. So something as odd as lemon balm or holy basil might be the answer to just modify our stress without sedating us. Do I have anything else about memory? There is. Eva, what's the Chinese name for those 4 extra points? Shishang. On the top of the head, the 4 points from Shishan Chong. Yes, there's 4 points at the very top of the head that are specific for memory. Those are extra points. They're not actually part of a meridian. So if you ever wondered why I can't remember something, you're actually stimulating those acupuncture points. So they're a little bit off the very top part of your head in the 4 directions. So forward and back, and then left and right side. So you can actually stimulate those. I remember when I was going in for my acupuncture board exams, and you just spent $100,000 in 4 years of your life, and it all comes down to 1 day of testing. It's a little bit different from nowadays, but that's the way it used to be. You'd spend like a half a day there just pouring your brain out on a piece of paper. And everybody was out there. We were putting all kinds of stimulants on our heads. Some people were actually needling themselves before they went in because we wanted to get every ounce of our brain out onto that paper. And it was horrifying. I don't know whether it helped or not, but there is some studies out of China that show there's some benefits for that. There was, what was that? There was one of those questions that I totally forgot after memory.
It was, you have a couple options, but there's one about candida.
Oh, candida, that was what it was. All right, candida stuff, there we go. So when we look at candida, that's usually, in energetic medicine, we look at that as phlegm or just a wet condition. And it's usually shows up when there's an underlying deficiency of stuff. That stuff in Chinese is usually a qi deficiency that leads to the accumulation of dampness or phlegm. When we look at ways to approach candida, it can be acute or chronic. And so acute, we see that with people with a weakened immune system, like we see it with infants and things like that. We can see it show up acutely with antibiotic use, and so we throw the gut flora, the skin flora, the vaginal flora gets thrown out of whack from antibiotics or other medications for that matter. It can show up when people are on immunosuppressants for autoimmune disorders or for immunosuppressants to prevent organ replacement from rejecting an organ. But we usually identify candida based on its location. So we say, if it's a vaginal yeast infection, we go, oh, it's a yeast infection. If we have it in our mouth or throat, it's thrush. And so we see it adapted for location. When it's in the small intestine, we call it SIBO, the small intestinal bowel overgrowth. Generally, it is in one or two locations. The idea is systemic. Candida, I won't say it's an herbal myth kind of thing, but it is more likely you'll be in the hospital if you have systemic candida. It's once it gets into the blood and things like that, bad things happen. That can be life-threatening. So usually what we look at is targeting that location. Sometimes we can do that with topical herbs, sometimes we need to do it with internal herbs. But when it's a chronic condition like SIBO, it's challenging. I usually, with SIBO, I'm usually looking at a year on a good day. And so it can be either just herbal, pharmaceuticals plus herbals. But what's always important is to find the cause of it. Certainly one of the most common causes is dietary. The overconsumption of sugars, to include fruit, and refined carbohydrates. And even if they're unrefined, if there's too much, that should not be the largest portion of our plate. It should be a smaller portion on our plate. That frequently will throw us into trouble. And it's important, eat your fruits and veggies. I would say minimum on the fruit, and those fruits that are the least sweet are our preference. If you're juicing a lot of fruits, then you're really just doing sugar bombs. To throw pineapple, banana, apple, and some spinach into your juicer, the spinach is there for color. It doesn't serve a purpose. And I sometimes make people mad when I say that, but it's like our food has been altered. For any of you who are lucky enough to be able to go out into the wild and pick wild blueberries and strawberries, not on a farm, but literally go walk in the hills up north. Blueberries are tiny and they're not particularly sweet, neither are the strawberries. And so it's not GMO, but it's selectively bred most of our fruits to be larger and sweeter, to have more sugar. So I usually say if you're going to have fruit, limit it to blackberry, raspberries, and ideally wild blueberries and strawberries, but I would say blueberries if they're farm raised, and ideally organic since they're heavily sprayed. And minimizing any refined carbohydrates or eliminating them altogether is frequently you're not going to have success if you don't do that. The next thing, and I harp about SIBO a lot because I'm seeing it. It used to be the rarest thing I ever saw. I didn't even know about it 15 years ago, I don't think. And I'm seeing it increasing amounts to the point of almost ridiculous. And it's hard to find any place that'll test for it. And then small intestinal bowel overgrowth or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, I've seen it translated both ways. And this is right at where the stomach empties into the top of the small intestines. We end up with an overgrowth of either candida, yeast, or bacteria, usually both, that causes a variety of digestive disturbances, malabsorption, leaky gut, and so forth. What I found is it's important to always ask, how come? Why are we having this particular thing? And if you're on the all chocolate cake and pie diet, that would make sense. If you're on multiple rounds of antibiotics and immunosuppressants, sure, that's going to have a dramatic role in it. But the low stomach acid is probably, for SIBO in particular, one of the most common things that I see. And the approaches to SIBO are challenging. In general, the initial phase of that is replace the stomach acid with, and you can buy HCl capsules. That usually has a dramatic impact on the success with SIBO. And then you don't want to start with giving probiotics, the good bacteria. We have to kill off all the bad stuff first. And sometimes that is with antibiotics and antifungal prescription medications. That sometimes works. I find they work better if we do it in conjunction with herbs like antigraphis, dandelion, burdock. It's one of the only times I recommend capsules of oil of oregano. Garlic can be helpful, red root, agrimony, I don't know. The Chinese formula, Xuanqin Lian Pian, can be helpful. But ultimately, we usually have to take a 1 to 3 month course of killing off all of the bad stuff there, the candidiasis and so forth, and then we can start to repopulate. And we have to be very restrictive in our diet. That initial 3 month phase is the most important. I would say no fruit, no sugars, minimal carbohydrates, like something like legumes or something might be fine, but again in small amounts, and really paying attention. Sometimes we need other carminatives like fennel, fenugreek, pau d'arco is a nice addition. That's the only one. Like, ginger, of course. Yeah, ginger or turmeric can be helpful in that mess as well. It's at that point that we can start to repopulate with probiotics, and we can look at specific blends that may be helpful, and continuing with the HCl and betaine, and oftentimes other digestive enzymes may be necessary as well. Once you get past, you start to get the good bacteria in there, then we need to look at ways to help to repair the gut, so that gut lining, the gut permeability issues, leaky gut. And that's some of those same herbs, but it might be anything from marshmallow if there's constipation. I do like the soil bacteria, the good soil bacteria. There's a couple companies now, but Megaspore, it's a little pricey, but they have good products. Astragalus can be really helpful for repairing the gut. Gotu kola, plantain. Yeah, those are the biggies off the top of my head. If we're looking at, and I didn't mention in that initial 1 to 3 month phase, things with berberine. That can be Oregon grape root, Huanglian coptis, Huang Bai, any number of things that have that antimicrobial kind of effect to it. If it's on the skin, we can use skin washes to get rid of that, but recognizing that the skin is a reflection of what's going on internally. We still need to limit the sugars and carbohydrates internally. If the interior terrain, the stomach, the digestive system and so forth is healthy, then we don't have to do as much work there. If it's less than perfect, treating what you see there. I love the addition of burdock, of dandelion, burdock if there's more constipation, dandelion if there's loose stools, and changing the ratio of those two. Smilax, that's in Jamaica, it's known as sarsaparilla. And when you get to the States, sarsaparilla is a different plant, but the Smilax, sarsaparilla, Smilax medica, or I'm going to say any Smilax for that matter, is specific for inflammatory skin disorders and helps with those wet, excessive conditions. Skin, you can also use a wash of things like chaparral, and again, anything with berberine in there. And any of your aromatic plants can be helpful for the skin wash. For vaginal candidiasis or rectal, anal for that matter, some of the same things. Again, if that's got a out of balance or dysbiosis, there's usually a gut issue frequently associated with a weakened immune system. And if you're not taking immunosuppressants, antibiotics, and so forth, I would say blood work would be vital, because why is your system that messed up? You may actually have an immune deficiency that needs to be investigated. again, looking at it internally with probiotics, and I'm not a fan of vaginal douches, but you can do baths or sitz baths. Um, there's specific vaginal flora that are important. And so getting a women-focused one, and I would say frequently those are the same ones we would use rectally as well. I like Powdarco and the Smilax again for anything below the belly button that's candidiasis. That's all I can think of.
There's an addendum
Yeah.
that just came in too for this question about, you touched on immune system a little bit.
Yeah.
But also, could low immune system or chronic sinus infections be an indication of candida?
Potentially. So, weakened immune system for sure. And so, getting blood work to ascertain that, making sure that they check the vitamin D levels, a full iron panel, which is iron saturation, TIBC, and ferritin, as well B12 and vitamin D levels. I kind of think that should be part of the regular blood work that you get. The CBC, complete blood count with differential, your doctor can order all of those. But here in the United States, and I didn't quiz everybody where they were from, but here in the United States, you can order your own blood work. Your insurance won't pay for it, but you can go online and say, order my own blood work. Google that, and it'll show up, and you just choose what you want for any of your blood tests. And you pay for it. It'll print out a receipt and a blood work order. You take that down to Quest or any of the other blood banks, and you get control of that. You can then either take that to your doctor, or if you're able to ascertain, if you're able to read through that on your own for some reason, go see an herbalist who understands medical herbalism a little bit to see what's wrong, because too often the doctors won't do it. But with a sinus infection, so sinus infections, they usually give antibiotics, and so if you have these reoccurring sinus infections, that means they've given you antibiotics multiple times, and if it just keeps coming back each time, it's probably not bacterial, because antibiotics only work for bacteria. So yes, that can be fungal, which is very common. And it could be candidiasis. That's the least likely. It's usually fungal in the nose, but it's just because it's usually doesn't mean it always is. And so making sure that, like, great, I've got my 5th sinus infection for the year. Find a doctor who's willing to swab that and test it. So if there's green and yellow and dry, bloody, blah blah blah, they need to test it and see if it is bacteria, what bacteria. But they'll also be able to ascertain if it's fungal and give you a course of antifungals. Something you can also do, if it is fungal in particular, is a garlic nasal wash. And so a neti pot where you got cool little thing, Ayurvedic medicine, and pour it through there. You can put herbs in a neti pot. There's a garlic nasal wash. If you go on YouTube and search my name and sinus infection, it'll come up. What's really important, and I'm not sure I did a great job on this video. This was 20 years ago I made that stupid video. It's not stupid, it's a great video. What's important when you do a garlic nasal wash, it's very effective for fungal and I would say candida sinus infections, is chop up 1 or 2 cloves of garlic. It should sit out and oxidize for at least 10 minutes. So you chop up your garlic or smash it or however you like to do it, and literally just let it sit there, go boil up some water that you're going to use for your neti pot. And don't steep the garlic in the water. If you do that, your face will fall off. It will burn like nobody's business. So if your neti pot's down here, you got a strainer here, put the garlic in there above the neti pot and pour that hot water over the garlic and let it run into the neti pot. Don't steep the garlic in there, it's too strong. Just literally pouring that through there is enough to get the action that you need. And then do your neti pot through, and even if your nose is all clogged up, you just might have to do that 20 times and try it a couple times a day. After a while, it will get through there. The other thing to consider, there's two other things to consider with reoccurring sinus infections. A, that there's a tooth infection. And so if you've had any dental work in the last few years when these things first started showing up, there may be a pocket of infection that's actually causing those sinus infections. So any upper dental work is a potential cause for that. If you have dental problems, I would make sure that that's investigated. The other one is an outside source. And so if there's a lot of mold or mildew in your house, i.e. there's a leak in your home, that's another cause that my sinuses get worse when I'm at home and they're horrible in the morning. When I leave and go to work, they tend to get better during the day. There's something in your home, and it could be anything from pet dander to a leak in your roof to a leak under a sink. And it doesn't have to be black mold per se. Any kind of excessive amounts of mold or mildew can cause some serious problems, and like a weakened immune system and a range of problems, but it's certainly sinus infections. Move is the easiest answer. Buy all new furniture, but that's not always feasible, obviously. Finding the leak, isolating it, getting it repaired would be the most important thing. An odd stopgap is boiling vinegar in your house in closed rooms. Just cheap white vinegar, the cheapest you can find. Make sure you remove any plants, pets, birds, humans out of that area, and literally just get a little burner stove and boil it for 30 minutes to an hour. Move that around to each room. That will really do a phenomenal job of getting into those cracks and crevices to remove it without causing a bunch of toxic crap. The other thing is an ozone generator. So you can get for under $100 an ozone generator / UV light that is a hospital grade sterilizer. Again, remove living things out of the room, any humans, pets, or plants. And you can put those on for an hour or two, and those do a really good job. It's what we use here in the clinic to sterilize our rooms. We move those around at least once a day to, COVID made us really focus on doing that. So it's without a doubt, really, both of those are very, very effective ways to go about it. All right, we're halfway through. I got a couple more questions we're going to jump to, but I'm going to give the selfless plug. So if you don't know, I'm Bob Linde from the Traditions School of Herbal Studies, Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies. You can find a copy of this probably in a day or two on YouTube under the Traditions School of Herbal Studies. We have all of these that we've been doing since COVID started and will continue to do. You'll find these all archived on YouTube. Please subscribe, because one of these days I'm going to have time to do lots of other cool videos like we have on there. And we've got a variety of classes, some in the morning now. Some of the 2-hour herb intensives are now in the morning, as well as Thursday and Friday evenings. And we have weekend intensives. The last 101 for this season is coming up next month and is almost full. You can do that in person or online. All of our classes are in person or online. Also, physical assessment for the herbalist is coming up. It's our first time teaching it. I'm super excited about that. And we have the Ayurvedic herbal series, and also the anatomy and physiology for the herbalist. For those of you who are getting into herbal medicine, but you're like, yeah, I haven't looked at sciencey stuff in a really long time. It's really nice refresher. I also want to say there's a lot of really fun conferences coming up and other events. Sorry, I had to give myself notes for all of this. I think the first one coming up, actually, this isn't a conference, but if you're in the Tampa Bay area, heck, if you're in Florida, the Green Thumb Festival is here in St. Petersburg, April 23rd and 24th. Theoretically is the largest plant festival in the Southeast. It's one of my favorite. I'm super happy we're back live and in person at that. It's all plants and everything plant related. And needless to say, I will have a crap ton of cool medicinal plants for sale at that event. And I always have a vase of our local plants that everyone's like, why'd you pick the weeds? I was like, hey, now that you said it, I'm going to tell you everything I know about those plants. And then the first Saturday in May, which I totally forget the day, it's National Herb Day, so you can find out more at herbday.org. But here in St. Pete, we have every year since they've started it, have a crazy extravaganza with about 20 plus vendors. We have music, weird foods, lots of cool stuff for sale. Of course, all of our vendors, and we'll have 2 lecture tents. We kind of take over the block here, and we'll have all of our students will have their products available that they had to make. That's their class. And they have to do about 15 to 20 minute presentations on the subject of their choice. And then we have the professionals tent at the other side, where we do classes like our drug interactions and some fancier ones that are a little bit longer for folks who want more depth of things. And some of our vendors who we consider experts in the realm, we let them do lectures as well. So come for an hour, come for the day. Herb Day rocks. But then I'm happy to say that Medicine's the Earth Conference at Black Mountain is back live and in person on June 3 through 6. I'm not going to be vending up there this year, but I just made my reservations this week. I think you can still get in on the early bird special. Lots of great stuff, very Western herbal oriented from beginner to very advanced, and there's awesome people like Seven Song and Corey Pine Shane and a lot of other people who are going to be doing things. Some of them are naturopaths, some of them are cool herbalists like Seven Song and Corey Pine. And then the one never to miss is the American Herbalist Guild. If you're not familiar with it, please check out the American Herbalist Guild's website. That is our professional organization for herbalism and herbalists. And they have a variety of different levels of membership, but their 33rd annual, that's just auspicious. The 33rd annual conference is coming up in Bethesda, Maryland, and they change location every year. So if you're like, I'm listening from California, well, we'll be over there in a year or two. That's coming up October 21st and through the 24th. I will be vending. I have not put in my application, but hopefully I'll be speaking at that one. I usually do. And oops, wait, I forgot it. And this is a new one for me. I'm super excited about this. This one is in Durango, Colorado. I'm going to be teaching a couple of classes at this one. And Good Medicine Confluence in Durango, Colorado. And this is July 28th through the 31st. From what I understand, they have a crap ton of speakers there, and it's a camping event and just super fun, I hope, because I'll be there. And you can find out more at planthealer.org. I'm sure there's other stuff, but that's all I can think of. Let's get back on to cool herb stuff. What you got?
We had a couple more comments come in about the ozone UV cleaning kind of thing. There was a recommendation for a product that I think hooks into your AC and does the ozone UV cleaning.
Yes. And that's a huge problem. And I've had that problem at my house. I have a ozone generator in my AC unit. I think they're like $1 to $2 grand. It's not too ridiculous, but it was noticeable when I had that installed. And I did have it installed because that's outside my skill set. I know where my talents lie. That is a really good suggestion. Yeah, I've forgotten about that.
And then the other one was if you can boil vinegar straight, and asking if you can, when can you enter the home after doing that?
Usually pretty fast. I would say, it's not toxic, but it's irritating. It's acetic acid, and it's in a vapor form. So, if you've ever balsamic vinegar reduction to make a drizzle on a salad or a salmon or something, and you're like, oh, that's kind of intense. That was acetic acid. So it's kind of the same in your house. So I would say, especially if you don't want to have all of it evaporate and you have now a hot burner that's in your house unattended, I would say put too much vinegar in and give it like 15 minutes and come in and see. I don't find it's that difficult to walk in. Your eyes will water a little bit. You might sneeze because your nose will get irritated, but you won't die from a second of exposure while you turn it off and open your windows and doors and air it out. So yeah, I've always just busted right in. Don't think twice about it. I don't even wait. Just go on in. Yeah.
Okay, and then we had a couple more questions come in. There, you can maybe talk about gout.
Ooh,
potentially.
That one's easy.
Yeah. Or there's one about an interdisciplinary kind of which choosing between what to study or what to partake in versus Eastern, Western, or Ayurveda.
Ugh. do them all.
Yeah.
No, we're the best. Come see us. No, it's all right. Let's do gout, and then I'll explore the herby thing. So gout is an accumulation of uric acid crystals, usually in a specific area. The classic big toe, one or both toes are oftentimes affected, but only 50% of the time it does that. It can actually affect any joint in the body. You can get gout in your hip or your thumb or your pinky, and so it's usually red, hot, and swollen. It frequently reoccurs, and it's usually preceded by poor food choices it is considered the rich man's disease, and it's usually fatty meats, and the number one trigger is booze. And so it tends to be the hard liquors more than wine, but it can an excessive amount of any of those. And is besides just the visual, like this crimson, almost purple, hot to the touch part of the body, they can do blood work and they'll test for uric acid crystals. And the Western treatment is a medication you go on for the rest of your life, whether you change your diet or not. And short term, it'll put you out of pain for pretty quickly. My personal preference, and there's lots of stuff, like if you Google it, you're going to see black cherry bark and all this other stuff. The Greeks described using celery seed thousands of years ago, specific for gout, and I've never seen it fail. I would say if you don't see almost 48 hours turnaround of improvement of symptoms from celery seed, it might not be gout. It is always a winner. I would say about a teaspoon a day of celery seed. You can go up from that if it's really bad, and then you can cut back to a more reasonable dosage for maintenance. But I hate to say it, little less meat, little less whiskey, and that will usually do it. There are things besides fatty meats and alcohol that will cause gout, but I think it's mushrooms and certain legumes. I don't even pay attention to those, because although those may be contributing, it's the alcohol and fatty meats, and usually the alcohol. And so celery seed's always my winner. There's some Chinese formulas that are clear, damp, heat, toxin, Simiaosan, and a few others. I'll oftentimes use those, but celery seed's always my first choice.
Would you increase the protocol or change it if it's extreme and it affects the heart and creates high blood pressure?
Oh, that's not good. Well, celery's good for high blood pressure too. It's hard to hurt yourself with celery. The worst part is you'll pee a lot. If you're on kidney dialysis, you wouldn't do it, or almost on kidney dialysis, some sort of major kidney issue. And I mean major, not like, they said my kidneys aren't perfect. Like, that's fine. For short term, you could definitely use more celery. Like, you could do a teaspoon like 3 or 4 times a day if you had to. But that should be short term. Push water, like lots and lots of water. And I would say at least I don't normally push a vegetarian diet, but I would say at least for a little while, incorporate a more vegetarian diet or very lean meats, lots of water, and skip the booze. And that should cause it to resolve pretty quickly. I've yet to have seen that fail. And there's nothing wrong with the cherry bark. I've seen it. Sometimes some people use the sour cherry, some people just the black cherry bark. Both are appropriate. I've just not seen them work as consistently as the celery. And the seed is better than just eating celery or even the celery root. You can use the celery root as maintenance, but the seed is the winner. And you can buy it as a capsule, but I find that you're going to be taking a lot of capsules to get that would be like 10 capsules 3 times a day. And I've not used tincture for it, so I'm not sure if a tincture would work or not. So I think the actual herb and somehow incorporating those into your food.
Sweet.
Okay.
And then the other question was about like interdisciplinary stuff, how to differentiate it or decide if you were going to partake in or to study Eastern, Western, or Ayurveda.
Yeah, it's funny. I was a I was a Western herbalist long before I ran away to acupuncture school and learned Chinese medicine. I grew up in the Bahamas. I don't think I've ever done lineage. Maybe I'll set that up for the next time. But I spent a number of years in the Bahamas and learned a lot of Bahamian Caribbean medicine, and certainly have been in Florida now on and off since 1979. So I've had, by necessity, learned our plants that either I can grow here or that are already native here to the Florida area. And sometimes it's almost what you gravitate to. The herbalism as a whole doesn't have licensure, and some people really want some sort of a license or designation. If you're going to want that, and I shouldn't say it, acupuncture, part of acupuncture training now is has usually been herbal medicine. So you get a third of your studies is in herbal medicine. You have to take a national board exam. You get a license as part of that. I'm safe to say that although I appreciate having a license, 80% of my patients are herbs only, that I don't find a need for the acupuncture, but when I need it, it's nice to have. You can also, there is an Ayurvedic association that gives credentials, and so they're credentialing, but it's not a license per se. And then the American Herbalist Guild doesn't care what your tradition is as long as you have a system to work under, and you can get the designation of registered herbalist or RH. And I think a lot of times it's almost where your interests are, which direction you want to go. Western herbal medicine, obviously we primarily work with both bioregional local plants as well as, I would say, North American, primarily Northeastern plants, and a lot of European and primarily Northern European plants. And they're more familiar. It's dandelion, it's burdock, it's things that you may have seen growing up. They're words that you've seen, or games that you've played, and so forth. And so there's a familiarity to that. And I would say there is some schools and some systems of study within Western herbalism incorporate energetics, and you hear me sometimes say hot, cold, wet, dry, deficient, excess, tense, and lax. And that's kind of a basic concept of Western herbal medicine and understanding it. They use tongue and pulse diagnosis that they kind of put together from Chinese and Ayurvedic studies. And I like that Western herbalism does a nice job at looking at spiritualism, and so each program varies on the amount that they bring in spiritual practices. They recognize the spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical, and tend to use more Western languaging. So from that perspective, I think Western is good. The challenge of Western herbal medicine is it doesn't have as strong a diagnostic system, and sometimes as issues become very complex or don't fit easily into that structure, it gets harder. Also, with each client, you're frequently having to create a unique formula for each one. There's also, and within Western herbalism, there's also things like medical herbalism, but that requires then a medical diagnosis, and you end up kind of pretending to be a functional medicine doc and a heavier reliance on nutraceuticals, vitamins, and minerals. Ayurvedic medicine is almost as in-depth as Chinese. There are lots of text out there. It's popular. I hate to say it. Yoga is a part of Ayurvedic medicine. And so Ayurvedic medicine has exercise therapy. They have meditation practices, so spiritual practices, dietary therapies. There's a lot of things like neti pots and shirodhara and all these other things that are kind of these external cleanse, purge kind of things, and a very well adapted diagnostic system We crank out Pitta Vata Kapha, but that's like saying your leg bone's connected to your hip bone. It's very simplistic. It is just as diverse. Massage therapy is a part of it. They have marma points instead of acupuncture points. A very similar system to Chinese. There are less, they have a number of classical formulas that they use. They're oftentimes very complex. And they have a number of textbooks in English, but not a ton. I'm sure there's better ones out there, but I've tried to get some. They tend to be very simplistic. Even though it's a very in-depth system, I think they just haven't been translated yet. And I think there's an aspect of the system that was destroyed because the English went in and screwed it up and kind of destroyed a lot of their tradition and history and burned a lot of their books when the English had taken over the country. Obviously, I'm partial to Chinese. And so you can either study just Chinese herbal medicine where there's no licensure for that, or the whole thing where you go to acupuncture school and you learn all of that and you get licensed. The nice thing about Chinese medicine is that the Chinese were smart enough to keep the Europeans out of their country. The 3 ports in the Yangtze River was all they allowed. There was the Opium Wars, and there was plenty of fighting within China that screwed some things up. And it wasn't until the communists came in and kind of screwed up China a little bit. But the reality is we can still read the original textbooks, the original manuscripts from over 2,000 years ago, almost 3,000 years ago, are still there in the original, that we can have those translations, or if you speak and read Chinese, you can read them yourselves. And so it's a fairly unaltered system of understanding disease and treatment outside the Western medical construct. It also is, when we look at Chinese medicine as a whole, it's got all of those things, everything from massage to acupuncture to herbal therapies to dietary therapies and exercise therapies. That's Tai Chi and Qigong. Oddly, the Chinese have now medicalized their system. A lot of the acupuncture schools are medicalizing it, and there's been probably since the communists took over China, there's been a real effort to remove some of the spirituality of it. And so it's still in there. You kind of have to look for it. And if we start to explore some of the things like Buddhism and Taoism, you can find those direct correlations. Qigong practices, Qi exercises, we see a lot of that. Spiritualism is still interspersed with all of that. So it's there for you. It's easily accessible. There's cool things like Shen Han Po that are looking at that mental, emotional, spiritual interconnection. The downside of Chinese medicine is there is pressure to go to acupuncture school and not just study it without a license. And it's in Chinese. And so that has it. Like, I don't teach my students Chinese, but we learn the herbs in Chinese. We learn the formulas, and there's pre-made formulas, so we don't always have to create a new formula and make minor adjustments to a classical formula. We can easily fit Western herbs into our Chinese medica. It has an unaltered tongue and pulse diagnosis. But it is, the Chinese system of understanding is so foreign to us, some of those ideas, and the words are not, some people are better at foreign languages than others, but if we're trying to understand it, we either got to learn Latin or we got to learn Chinese. They don't translate well into English, even though probably a quarter of that medica in Chinese is Western herbs. Like, we see things like plantago, plantain, is used in Ayurvedic, Chinese, Western. Your artemisias, mugwort, and so forth are used in all the systems. Corn silk is used in every system. So which one's better? I don't know. It comes down to what do you gravitate to. It comes down to, if you want formal schooling in person, then it comes down to what you got near you. And a lot of people don't know what they want to do. They're like, herbs are cool. Or you just want self-care out of it, then sometimes Western herbal medicine, because it's so approachable, might be the better one to go to. And I would say also the clinical life. It's like, no, I want to be a clinician. I'm going to be a clinical herbalist. I want to hang up a shingle and see clients. Then you need to make sure that the training you get actually incorporates an actual live and in-person clinical practice where you get supervised. And I'm going to brag, my school's got that. So there's great schools all over the place, amazingly gifted herb teachers all over the place. But to find a place that has an ongoing clinical experience for their students is challenging, and doing case discussions aren't the same, and working on your classmates once or twice is not the same. So I'm horribly biased. I like the programs that we have here, but there are a few other programs that do a pretty good job, and if I'm finding out there's one or two other ones in the nation that actually have ongoing herbal clinics for their students. I think there's one in New York and one in Vermont, and there's bound to be one in California. California's got everything. If you're kind of like, I think this stuff is cool, there's tons of online courses. We finally, COVID forced us to do things on Zoom, so there's a lot of recordings, things like that. Sometimes the best way to I don't freaking know, I don't know what I want to do. Conferences are wonderful for that because those are frequently the teachers are associated with a school. You get to learn about their teaching style, and you get exposure to a lot of different thought and system of ideas there. And so I find those teachers that I like. I follow them frequently in conferences. I try to bring them down here because it's all about me. I like bringing David Winston down and Jim McDonald and some of the other ones just because they've got stuff to teach me still. My learning hasn't ended yet. It still goes on every day. My running story is not a joke, but I probably continue to do research and study about 2 hours every day, and I've been formally doing this for close to 25 years now. It never ends. And there's also, and I always have to remember, there's not enough credibility given to lineage. So if you come from a culture where herbalism is oftentimes incorporated, or just a family where your grandmother or your mother was an herbalist, a healer, a root doctor, a curandero, and they've taught you stuff that has just as much, if not more, validity than somebody who goes to school and studies for a year or so. So never discount if you have the more informal training as an herbalist. That has great credibility and unique and special, and primarily bioregional stuff. And then you can supplement through things like conferences, your own studies, and so forth to expand on all of that. Hopefully I did that. Covered that fairly well, which basically was like, I don't know, whatever you like. Any other new ones in there?
No new ones.
All right, I think we had one more in here. We said all that. Okay. And we got piece of cake. So one of the other questions we had was, and I probably got time for one more question if anybody online's got one more question. There was a question about using herbs pre and post surgically. And this is super challenging because most surgeons will tell you no supplements, no herbs. Some will tell you 5 days prior to a surgery, some will say 10 days. It's literally I hate to say this, the whim of the surgeon rather than volumes of repeated double-blind placebo-controlled research. It's literally out of ignorance and fear. That said, there's many herbs and supplements we should stay away from prior to surgery. In particular, those things that are likely to cause some sort of blood thinning. We don't want an increased bleeding. We don't want any surprises for the surgeon. When they're doing surgery, if there's an increased flow of blood that's harder for them to stop, there's a risk of blood loss, but also they can't see as well. There's lots of things in their way. They're suctioning all the junk out. So we want them to have as easy a time doing whatever it is that they need to do on us. And there is, I always say, Western medicine, I have my issues with it, but they save lives every day. And if I get hit by a truck, I want the surgeon, I want the drugs, I want the x-ray, I want everything. It's when we start to look at chronic care, sometimes their system falls down. And so what I like to call heroic medicine, they are phenomenal at. When you have a burst appendix, promise you want them. The fact that they can replace a heart is literally a magical, bizarre thing. That they can crack you open, do stuff, put you back together again, and honestly, most of the time you're fine. And so we always like to think about, like, we want their job to be as easily as humanly possible if we're put into that situation where we need that heroic medicine. And there are things that we can do to build people up to be more successful, because there are risks when we open people up. Everything from infection to blood loss. Okay, those are the biggest. And then we want on the other end to prevent infection again, minimize the side effects of any of the medications that they've given us, and also speed the recovery and healing in that process. So I'm going to generically say the big don't do is nothing that might thin the blood. The obvious ones are, and some of these you can debate, but I'm going to say these are biggies. Fish oil should be stopped, aspirin, it's an over-the-counter, and anything that contains salicin, so no white willow bark, no meadowsweet, supplements like serapeptase, nanokinase, vitamin E, are all, like, not even a question blood thinning. There's a number of Chinese herbs that's, I'm going to say anything in the blood invigorating, blood moving, or blood stasis herbs, any of those, I would just say just don't do it unless you're extremely well versed in that. There are, and the easiest thing is just do what they say. I would say probiotics, there's no blood thinning properties to good gut flora, and they're likely to give you antibiotics IV or orally pre, during, and post. And so doing your best to keep a healthy digestive system, I would say, is important. Vitamin D, as much time prior to surgery as you can do to get optimal vitamin D levels. I would say that's above 50. The range is like 30 to 100, depends on scales and so forth. Because it has such a role in your immune system and bone healing and things like that, I would argue getting above 50, the ideal like 70 to 90. If you're above 50, you've done a great job. You can also look at vitamin C, zinc, B vitamins as close to the start of the surgery as possible. So doing those in reasonable amounts up to that 10 or 5 days, whenever your surgeon tells you to stop doing stuff. Probiotics, vitamin D, one of my favorites, and the thing I'm least versed at is things like homeopathics. And homeopathics are different from herbs, although we use a lot of the same substances. This is literally the true example of vibrational medicine. If we tested a homeopathic, we would likely find no traces of it. And I don't use a lot of them. But the one that I always recommend pre and post surgical, and has a long history of being used literally to include like the day before surgery, because you're not supposed to eat anything on the day of your surgery, and that's arnica. And I would just follow directions on that rather than me trying to guess at dosing, because products are different. But I would say, not that this is medical advice in any form or fashion, but there's no contraindications to using homeopathics or a homeopathic of arnica prior to surgery, and I would say immediately, as immediate afterwards as possible post-surgical, to reduce swelling and trauma associated and speed healing. And there's other ones, but that's the one I'm most familiar with for that. An extremely controversial one that I would say only work with an herbalist or an acupuncturist well trained in it is Yunnan Baiyao. And again, if you look at the ingredients, there's some potential contraindications with that, but that is classically can be used pre-surgical. It won't do any good 5 days out, so with a surgeon's permission, that might be utilized on the day prior or the day of surgery. That is a potential one. Post-surgical, as soon as you are able to, and this obviously is some surgeries are bigger deals than others, I would say bone broth, and in particular a classical Chinese formula, and you can create some Western equivalents, but basically bone broth, and it's actually Wu Qi Bai Feng, which is black chicken white phoenix formula. And so we use that for recovering from surgery, difficult childbirth, long illnesses, and you can adapt that formula. It is not a precise formula. It has a general just nourish the crap out of you constituents, and for real, it's a whole black chicken, and I think that black chicken is important. It'll creep some of you out, but it has the head and face on it, and the feet. Those should all be left on. You can pull the guts out. And you can usually find that in an Asian market. We have a local, one of our graduates has a farm here in Florida that she is raising free-range organic, not certified organic, but they are, I promise they are about as organic as you can get. I don't know, can you have a biodynamic chicken? But she actually has the Chinese silkies, the black chicken. She offers it to our students, Tassila, and I forget Tassila's last name. But if you're in the Florida area and like to contact her, I'm happy to pass on her contact information. Just reach out to me on email or Facebook, traditionsherbschool@gmail.com. Will get to us, or just go through the website to get to us with that. Things like plantain as a tea, calendula as a decoction or tea can be helpful. I do not recommend comfrey internally ever. And I would say post-surgically, I generally wouldn't recommend comfrey, only because it will grow the surface of the skin too fast and could potentially trap bacteria and grow too fast. If there's stitches in, that would actually start to envelop the stitches. I've actually had people where comfrey's been too effective at it. There's also some classical Chinese formulas, Jinggu Xia, oh my god, I totally forget it. The Great Mender, and Plum Flower has the Great Mender. There's a couple of versions of that. There's also some traumatology formulas based on the stage, and surgery is an injury, so we treat it like an injury. Trauma 1 or 2, depending, trauma 1 in those initial first few weeks post-surgical, trauma 2 for the follow-up care, especially if there's swelling, edema around the surgical site or below it. And always probiotics afterwards. If there's infection, you can use some washes. If that's okay surgically, I would actually ask your surgeon about doing how to wash it, but using things like calendula and plantain. Also things containing berberine, Oregon graperoot, coptis, and I really like both internally and externally things like red root and echinacea. Echinacea is excellent for blood poisoning, so for preventing internal infection. I never use it for colds and flu unless there's like swollen tonsils and it's a topical. Those are probably, and I would continue with the, once you're no longer concerned about blood thinning issues, using all the mushrooms. Those can be put in with the black chicken soup. vitamin C, B complex, a multi-mineral specifically looking to the zinc, can be really helpful for speeding up the healing process. And then I would say always balancing based on what you see. We can look at things like nettles is excellent addition. Burdock is an excellent addition. I would not use alfalfa pre-surgical. Alfalfa has some potential blood thinning properties, and I would probably not use alfalfa for at least a week, not until a week had passed post-surgical, just being extra cautious. We don't want to screw up their good work. I'm sure I'm forgetting some things, but those are probably the biggies with that. Anything else jump up in my babblement on all of that?
Not yet.
All right, so next month, so the last Friday of the month, I made an executive decision. I have enjoyed the heck out of doing this online, and we will continue to do it online for all you people who are not around here. But I'm going to start doing these in person as well as online. So next month we will be at the classroom at 6340 Central Avenue in St. Petersburg, Florida. I'll also live stream it here on Facebook again. If you are coming in person, just so that we have a head count and all that, I ask that you RSVP to the school at the Traditions Herb School at gmail.com. And we're not charging for it. It's still going to be free. I think we always need to get more information out there for the masses. If you didn't catch it before, you can find out more about me, about the school, about the clinic, get in to see us. Acuherbals.com, 1C, not 2, or traditionsherbschool.com. Remember that we've got a variety of herbalists and acupuncturists here, as well as a spiritual healer. There's one or all of those are here 6 days a week. And 3 nights a week we have our intern clinic. On Monday nights I have 4 awesome acupuncture interns in their last year of school, as well as 2 Chinese herbalist students in their last 6 months or so. On Tuesday night we have our awesome Western herb students, and they are here. We've got appointments at 6:30 and 8. And on Wednesday nights are the Chinese students, the Chinese senior students. Each night there is one or more of the senior herbalists here, usually me, and one other person, sometimes 2 other people, to help supervise and make sure they don't hurt anybody and make sure they're taking the right approach. And anytime you come in for, I would say with any herbalist, but especially here, whether it's student clinic or doctor's clinic, we love it when you bring blood work. Awesome if you actually bring in your supplements. And I know some of y'all have suitcases and wheelbarrow fulls of supplements, me included. But being able to see the bottle so that we can do math and see if you're taking too much, the quality control with things like magnesium and B vitamins and so forth, it's really helpful when we get to see all of that. And honestly, there isn't an issue that we can't have some benefit for. Chronic disease is complex, and stress is always an aggravating factor, and so at the very least we can do very safe things. My students are always well versed in herb-drug interactions, and I will always err on the side of caution with all of those. But at the very least we can use acupressure, using magnets, ear seeds, and other cool stuff. So I hope for any of you who are nearby that we see you in more classes, the free and not free. I am going to be adding an herb-drug interaction class. I forget what the date was, but April and May, we'll be adding that to the calendar, and that one will be live or in person, as well as probably Facebook. It'll either be Zoom or Facebook. I'm not sure which, so you may have to register for that. And if you're not in this area and you need to see an herbalist or an acupuncturist, the American Herbalist Guild is a wonderful place to find a well-qualified herbalist in your area. And for acupuncture, it's hard to seek them out, asking at health food stores, asking other practitioners, but make sure that they're a licensed acupuncture physician or doctor of Oriental medicine. There's a number of professions that can take the 2 or 3 day course and put sharp objects in you when they're not really good qualified practitioners of Chinese medicine. So you always want somebody who's gone through a formal school, that they've taken the board exams to pass and got their license in acupuncture. And with that, if there's no other questions, I'm going to let you all go. Remember, you can get a copy. This will be archived on YouTube, and you can find lots more. So Traditions School of Herbal Studies on YouTube to watch all the past episodes, as well as me doing various crazy antics literally around the world. And I hope to be adding more on there. Also, if you haven't seen it, you can find more. You can see me on Inti TV. I have a 12-part TV series in Ecuador. I don't speak Spanish, so I am subtitled, and the photography of the crew that was with me was phenomenal. If you speak Spanish, you'll get way more benefit out of it. But check them out, and hopefully, as the pandemic chills out, I will be back in Ecuador doing another season with Inti TV, because they did a great job supporting me through all that. So I will see you all later. I got to go get ready for class tomorrow. I am teaching stabilize, bind, and food stagnation this weekend for all of my students. So we will see you, hopefully some of you live and in person, on the last Friday of March, or an Herb Day. Yay! Bye, y'all. Let's see how I turn this off.